Neil James, thanks very much for your time. Firstly, to the point of actually publishing an article like this, how damaging is it in terms of the ongoing work that we are doing in Afghanistan?
Well, our major concern about this, and we've had the email virtually from the moment it was sent, is that News Limited have published it in such a way it can identify the whistleblower concerned, which we think is disgraceful. In negotiations with the Chief of Defence Force, he promised me that there wouldn't be a witch hunt to find the digger in question, and therefore we handed over a redacted version of the email so we could raise the issues raised in the email with the hierarchy of the Defence Force. But unfortunately the News Limited papers have chosen not to use our redacted version and have published the original email, which is just, quite frankly, irresponsible. How
far had you got in those discussions with Defence in terms of the issues that were raised in the email?
Look, we've been having some reasonably extensive discussions with Defence. That's our job as the public interest watchdog. I personally have sat down with the CDF and discussed this. I've also personally discussed it with the Chief of Joint Operations. There are many matters in the email that are quite valid. There are one or two matters that possibly aren't, because any battle depends on the perspective with which you watch it. But the bottom line here, of course, is a political problem, and that is both sides of politics aren't keen to increase the size of the force in Afghanistan because they're frightened of public opinion. And our argument all along has been the best force protection measure is an adequately sized force, and also the mentoring task force probably does need to be bigger, particularly in the transitional period until the Afghans take over. So if they get into trouble like this battle, they can be extracted from it more easily and indeed kill more Taliban so they can't come back to fight them another day.
So we've got two issues that are running parallel in terms of what has come up in the email. Firstly, the one that is around inadequate support, better intelligence, that we are sending our men and women into battle without proper and adequate support and firearms, for example. Now, the second one is that particular incident. If we deal with the first one, you're saying that there is probably validity to those claims, that they aren't provided with inadequate support.
Look, I'd have to say that most of the emails are a pretty accurate assessment of what happened. The artillery support was possibly a little bit better than the email made out. But there's a real problem when we put soldiers in a fight with a large group of enemy and they start to run low on ammunition and they get inadequate air support so close to Tarin Kowt. These are valid, real problems, and they basically can be traced back to the fact that the force we have in Afghanistan is probably not big enough for the task that they're facing, and this needs to be addressed.
But as you're saying, there's no political will, because on both sides of politics this does not want to be necessarily addressed.
Well, that's been largely the problem over the last 2 years, ever since the Dutch announced they were going to leave, and naturally enough there's a big professional debate about this in the Defence Force. But no matter how good that professional debate is in the Defence Force, and quite frankly it's quite a healthy one, the problem is at the political level, in that both sides of politics aren't keen to increase the size of the force in Afghanistan, and as we've argued for over 2 years, that should be seriously looked at.
And if they're not prepared to do that, then should we pull out?
Well, unfortunately it's not quite that simple, because even if we wanted to pull out, we'd have an enormous political and strategic problem in doing so. But the bottom line of it is if you're going to fight any war, you should fight it to win, or you shouldn't be there in the first place. And that's something the Defence Association's been saying for the last 2 years. But unfortunately, everyone keeps looking at the debate as a political management problem and not as a war fighting problem. And that's really the frame of reference they should be using.
Now, this particular digger that has identified this issue has sent this email. What do you think will happen to him? If he can be identified, as you say.
Well, we would hope nothing will happen to him. The Chief of Defence Force did promise me personally that there wouldn't be a witch hunt. But the problem is, you've got a small group of people over there fighting a particularly hard war, and the last thing you want is something that will interfere with the group dynamics of that team. And by irresponsibly printing the entire email this morning, News Limited papers have unfortunately made that task harder.
And what about his colleagues, the people around him? How will they feel about the fact that he has fired off this email?
Look, I suspect most of his mates are on his side. The problem won't come from his mates, it'll come from people higher up the hierarchy, and probably not people directly commanding him. It'll be in the intermediate levels of command. But we have no problems at all with whistleblowers blowing things like this up. So long as we can do something about it, in a measured and professional fashion, rather than have the identifying detail of the whistleblower sprayed over the newspapers, which we'd argue won't really achieve as much as behind-the-scenes negotiations will.
Well, watch as it unfolds. Thanks for your time.